Leverage is a key word. That's a key to the quest of success. There is leverage. What's the one thing that you can leverage that will catapult you in the next 6 to 12 months?
All right, welcome to another Quest for Keys, where we highlight the key moments in entrepreneurs' lives to unlock the doors on their path to success. I'm your host, Hone Tai, and joining me is my ever-inspiring co-host, Alvin Uy. And today, we have a very special guest today. He is the founder of PPR Capital, a private investment note firm that specializes in distressed debt and real estate investing opportunities. And he is also the author of a book named Real Estate Note Investing Using Mortgage Notes to Passively and Massively Increase Your Income. So today, our guest is Dave Van Horn, but to me, he is known as the godfather of real estate investing because of his contribution to the industry and by helping so many people in this business become thriving real estate investors. So his impact not only touched real estate investors, but through his philanthropic work, he's been able to improve the lives of the homeless and the less fortunate. So, with decades of experience in the industry, Dave has mastered the art of turning challenges into opportunities, helping countless investors grow their portfolios while creating lasting value. So, please help me welcome Van Horn. Do.
Wow.
You're making me blush.
Yeah, that's because you're the man, Dave. Go ahead, Alvin. What were you going to say?
No, I was gonna say, look, you're perfect for our podcast because this is all about life's journey and successes and keys that you've found to unlock doors. So you've had such an amazing life. You're a serial entrepreneur in the beginning, and you've unlocked so many levels and uncovered so many different things, traveled so many paths that you hit something, you're like, you know what? There's a better path. So this is exciting. I'm super excited by this.
That means I had a lot of failures. That's what he's.
Hey, failures are great. That's part of the journey. Key number one right there, guys.
Number one, just keep going. It's not a failure.
That's the key number one for your quest for keys. Yeah. So Dave, before we get started, I just want to say thank you because you've been able to affect my life. When you hosted the Mid-Atlantic Summit, for those who don't know what that is, that's a big event that Dave throws, and he collects a lot of money for charity. And he was telling a story about his family and how I think it was like drug use and then homelessness and all of this kind of stuff wrapped together, and that all the money you raise is to go help people in very similar situations. And it just goes to show you that, like, yes, we're all here to become successful entrepreneurs, real estate investors, and we want to make all this money, but it's like, for what? And the for what part is that you can really help humanity. And so just seeing you on stage, actually seeing you cry for the first time, that was the first time I seen you cry, right? Seeing you cry because this, it was very touching. It moved me. So I just wanted to say thank you for being vulnerable, hosting that event, giving back to others, because you don't have to do any of those things. Nothing, not a single one of those things. But because you do those kind of things, you impact people like myself and other real estate investors. And then now we get to carry on the torch and help other people and create similar impacts. So thank you for that, Dave.
No, you're saying something. It's a great point that you're bringing up, because a lot of real estate investors get a bad rap, right? Because we charge rent, or there's slumlords, or what have you, right? And no one talks about the good that we can do. And then I also like to challenge other real estate investors, because they'll put out stuff. You'll see it on social media. Their ideas of success are, how many doors do I have? Or I'm standing next to a jet or something like that. But that's not what brings real happiness, right? It's not material things. It's not stuff. It's the impact and the intention, right? So all I do is suggest to people, challenge yourselves, because if you're so smart and you're this brilliant real estate investor, then why can't you add one more layer to it, one more component to it? Like, who are you helping? Who are you having an impact with your investing, right? So, and I don't think it's that hard to do. You can do both. You can be very successful, very profitable, make good money, live a great life. But I think you're going to get the most rewarding stuff out of the people that you're helping. I mean, when I look, I had a drug and alcohol recovery center for 11 years. That was the most rewarding piece of real estate I ever owned. Nothing came close to it because people would come to you and say, "You saved my husband's life. You saved my son's life." People would be like overwhelmed with that. Now we lost people too, but you were making a real difference, right? So it's just like, I'm saying it has to be that. I'm just saying that think about whatever it is that you're doing. How do you add another layer to it? Maybe it's affordable housing. We do a lot of that at PPR, for example, where we're building affordable housing right now in a location that has zero affordable housing. So it's you can go out and make a difference and still be profitable, and still have regular investments. And so I commend anybody that can do it, and I just encourage people to do it because it'll be much more rewarding than nobody's going to say, I want 10,000 doors on my tombstone. That what does that even mean, right? Because 100 years from now, no one's even going to know who Dave Van Horn was or anybody else for that matter, most likely. So it's um, what kind of impact can you have on the people that are here, right? So
What's funny is one of the things that I really like about you, Dave, is like you'll challenge the whole idea of this person's philosophy or whatever. You go, like you just did it. You said, well, if you're so smart, then it's not a big deal to add another layer, which is this philanthropic side of it, right? It's like you challenge people based on what they think is what they're after. And a key that you just dropped just now was that adding this layer actually unlocks more happiness. And at the end of the day, what are we chasing? A lot of people are just saying, I just want to be happy, happy little Billy, right? I just want to be happy. And you're like, okay, if that's what you actually want, then layer this on top of everything else that you're doing. And you will get what it is that you want, even though nobody tells you to go that way, other than Mr. Dave Van Horn, of course.
yeah, I mean, create jobs, whatever it is. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, right? No one's saying I'm not being prescriptive or talking from high on the mountain or anything. But it's put it this way, it's given me a lot of joy. I will say that, and it's usually most of my joy is coming from the people I'm helping, not necessarily money I'm making or something like.
Right. And Alvin, you wanted to open up a recovery house, or do you already have one?
No, I don't, but I'm looking into it right now. Like I'm just barely scratching the surface now, just doing some research on it. But you did touch on like treatment rehab centers, and I'm thinking about opening one of those at some point. Maybe not now, but maybe next year. But I'm starting a RCFE or assisted living at this point. But I see that sort of almost like a parallel direction that I can basically build the real estate for at the same time. So I think I love it. The whole purpose driven direction is kind of where I'm headed, and I find a kinship just listening to you right now. I love it. Like I'm totally inspired.
Well, it
So
is a business within a business, so keep
it
that in mind.
is
And
right.
there's, I mean, the biggest key in recovery is the it's kind of the system, the process. It's really your internal management. It's not the facility or the furniture or the
It's the
location.
operation. Yep.
That's all. That's the easy part. Like that's the hardest part is your management team there. So that's going to be. Now, I was fortunate; I had some extra resources in that area, but that's what'll make or break it for most people.
I agreed. So just listening to you right now, like you've done so much, right? And we're all still kind of chasing dragons, but and we call dragons as challenges and fears. Is there like a certain dragon you're still chasing at this point, or trying to tame or slay? Is there,
I think we all have them. It's just like fears or personal defects, right? We all have them, right? I think it's more of a self awareness journey of realize, like, believe me, if you want to know what your personal defects are, ask your significant other. Because they will be glad
uh,
to give you a list of personal defects. But fears are always there. Like I grew up with not much. My dad left my mom when I was 8, and we had 6 kids. So I was raised by a single mom with 6 kids. So there's a lot of fear, and there was a lot of fear of even today. No matter how successful I may appear or be on paper, there's still fear in the back of my mind that I could be homeless, or I'm only, and it's maybe it's from the business we were in where we were buying a lot of distressed debt, and our goal was to try to keep homeowners in their homes. But you saw what happened to people, and it's usually a life event. It's death, divorce, job loss, and medical, and you see the challenges that people can get blindsided. And most Americans don't have a lot of money in the bank, and they're literally 60 days away from bankruptcy, the average American. So it doesn't take a lot to witness it every day. Just from, I've over the years sold insurance, and, I was a realtor for 35 years. You saw people at every stage of life, starting out, getting married, getting divorced, you know, going into assisted living, like you mentioned. You see every life cycle, and estates and all, and you see the dynamics of what takes place, and you realize, a lot can be done in these areas to even some things out, right?
Yeah, and speaking of which, like, you're talking about other things that, I heard you mention something in a podcast at one point. You talked about people are chasing passive income, but you said something about it's the better phrasing is chasing passive freedom. And you listed that you had like 6 freedoms that you're trying to basically um, teach people to chase instead. Can you expand on that a little bit, because I think that's something very important.
So a lot of times we think we're chasing people will say, I need passive income. But it's really more than that, because it's really, what does the income buy you? What does, you hear people with the FIRE movement and FI, I want to achieve FI, I want to retire at early age. And I don't know that that's necessarily true. I retired the first time at 42 because I got injured, and I had enough portfolio that I didn't have to go back to work. But it wasn't realistic. It would, to retire at 42. I was bored to tears in 90 days. And my wife was like, "You're not going to be home again today, are you?" And I literally went and got an office to get out of the house. But I mean, and then I started something else, right? But you think you want some of those things, but there's other factors, right? And I think it's more about, I personally have a half a dozen freedoms, and I use it as a filter whenever, like, a new project comes by, a new deal comes by, a new business comes by. I run things through that filter, and I say, does it meet my freedoms that I work so hard to get to? And then there's some obvious ones and not so obvious ones, and it's not that I necessarily I'm prescriptive where I want people to say you have to adopt my 6 freedoms. Um, but I talk about it in a way where you want to develop your own set of freedoms if you can, and then it's like your core values or your family values. It's kind of similar to that, but so my freedoms are like, I have, I'm at a different age than some folks, right? A lot of it's age dependent, or where you are, in what I'll call the football game of life. What quarter are you in? Some of your views change. Another way to look at that is the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. You'll hear a lot of banter about the go-go years and the active investor, the active business, the active, person. But a lot of people don't like to talk about the slow go or the no go, and there's not a lot of preparation a lot of times in some of these areas, because it's inevitable. It's a matter of time. Um, but these freedoms, right? For example, mine are, to give you color. There's some obvious ones. One is, freedom of time, and time's more valuable than money. And as you get older, you'll really realize that. When you're younger, you don't have. I didn't have as much money as a blue collar guy, right? I didn't. Money was more important than time, and a lot of times I was trading time for money. In fact, there was a 20-year period where I was working 2 jobs. I had building a real estate portfolio on top of that, so I had a business. I was a real estate agent on nights and weekends, and then my wife worked also, and I had 2 kids. Right, so we were like ships passing in the night, and I thought, well, if I just worked more, I'll have more. Right? It was a pretty primitive view of the world. There was no leverage there. And leverage is a key word. That's a key to the quest of success there, is leverage. And I had a business coach that always asked that question. What's the one thing that you can leverage that will catapult you in the next 6 to 12 months. And there's another view of that too in the book, The One Thing. It's what's the one thing that would make everything else um, unnecessary or irrelevant, right? So that's another way to look at that too, right? So they're great questions to ask yourself and apply to your business, your investing, or your personal life, right? So, but back to the freedoms, this freedom of time is critical. And right now, I'm at an age where how much time do I have? I'm hopefully in the third quarter, but it's likely I'm in the fourth quarter, right? And I'm very conscious of that, right? So I'm very strict with my time, and I do slash commitment. So I use the word commitment as well with my time. So I don't want to be over committed. I don't want
Mm,
to have to be showing up at a lot of things on a regular basis. Like I don't like being overly committing myself. I like the freedom of having the choice of what to do with my time. And I'll often hear people with their like routines and their different things. And one of mine is, like I don't use alarms
mm,
to wake up in the morning. Now I do get a lot of sleep. I'm very strict on my sleep and things like that. And I do things everybody else does. I meditate, I pray, I work out, I do all the same things. Um, some intermittent fasting and all that good stuff. But I'm very cognizant of being overcommitted to stuff because we get wrapped up in these things. And I've been in groups and meetings. I'm like, it's 6 years later. I'm like, why am I still in this?
mm.
Nothing wrong with some of that stuff, but you tend to outgrow things, or you're in meetings. Some of the meetings you're in, you're like, why am I in this meeting? I don't belong in this meeting. This meeting, I'm not moving the needle here. So really look at your calendars. And one of the things I did several years ago, I took my calendar not just for the week or the day or the month. I took it for the year.
Wow.
I made 3 columns, and it was really what I love to do, and the other was what I hate to do. Why am I doing that? And then the middle column's the trickiest, where there's things I'm doing that I can be doing, but should I be doing them? And what you'll quickly find with the 80/20 rule is, you know, 80% of your results are coming from 20% of your activity. And if you do the 80/20 of the 20, you'll find that 4% of what you're doing gets you about 65% of your results. So why are we doing all these other things, all this stuff, all these things that people expect us to do? And you quickly realize, not that I'm perfect at this, I'm progress over perfection, but you get the idea. So I started doing that several years ago, and that's how I started to change my life dramatically. Because I was like, why am I doing these activities? I have a limited amount of time on this earth. And that led me back to these 6 freedoms, right? So one was around time and commitment. Um, and then the other ones were obvious ones like money. Of course, if you have plenty of cash flow and money and net worth, you don't have to work, right? You don't have to answer to anyone. But then there's other ones like freedom of responsibility was a big one. So I used to own a lot of properties. I used to have 40 places locally even. And obviously PPR, I mean, they're at 1 billion in assets right now. So but that's the companies kind of running that, which makes life much easier. So I'll give you an example. Like I wouldn't run out and buy a multi-family apartment complex. And I'm going to be the operator, and I'm going to no. I would rather own that in my company because then that's running without me,
Right.
right? Like I'm not looking to add complexity to my own life. So I have to catch myself once in a while because I get all kinds of stuff thrown at me on a daily basis. Like, hey, you want to do this deal and that deal and this deal and this, and I'll look at certain things and I'm like, how much complexity is with that, or it's like a whole nother job or business. I'm looking for more on the passive investing side of, and I have no problem with some people being active as long as that active person isn't me. And my wife kind of got me off on this because she was like, why do we still own all these properties? What happens if something happens to you? Now I'm dealing with your property manager and your properties and all this stuff you left me. And she's right. So I started looking at it. It's just like when I was saying earlier, how do you add in another layer to your intentional investing and be more impactful? Well, how do I be more intentional and impactful with my heirs? And because if you're really successful, one of my favorite questions is, what are you building? Are you building a portfolio? You building a saleable business? You're going to go public? What are you building? And you're going to exit that someday. So one of the things my wife was like, she's like, why don't you get, what I ended up doing is I sold my last 14 places about 3.5, 4 years ago. And you could just feel the responsibility lift off my shoulders of just
Mm.
even having to deal with the property manager. And I was a property manager. I was a property manager at Remax years ago. And I had the same property manager for over 20 years. She was phenomenal. She was great. But you know what? She was never calling me to wish me a happy birthday. It was always like, the tenant shot the neighbor's dog or something. It was always something, right? So I didn't want to leave that to my wife. I wanted my wife to be able to go, so pretty much what I'm saying is we mostly live in a K1 world, right? Where get a pack stack of K1s, hand it to account, we're done. We want to
Hmm.
spend 6 months in Europe or South America or Asia. We can do whatever we want. Go out. We have total freedom, and that's one of my other freedoms is freedom of location, so that I can live and work wherever I want. And we do that. We do that. Domicile can matter. It can matter for taxes. You can live in a zero income tax state or whatever. So it can matter in a lot of ways. It can matter for weather. It can matter for daylight. Like there's an extra hour of daylight in the South in the wintertime than there is. I live in the Northeast where, my family is and stuff. So, and you have flexibility, especially while you have the go-go years and the slow-go years. You can still travel and get around pretty good. So why not maximize some of these things? It's really just what I'm really saying is with this passive freedom idea is how can you live a more passive life, which is basically giving you more options. And really all it's saying is how could you be more efficient and
Mm.
more intentional in your personal life, with your business, and with your investing. Because if you're really successful, you're going to end up as a family investment company or a family office. Because that's what it is. Because all your assets are going to be sold someday. It's just when. Are they going to be
Mm.
sold before you pass away or after you pass away? And how do you want that to roll out? And most people, they don't look at it. They're in accumulation mode all the time. Like, how do you know when enough's enough if you're the entrepreneur who never turns it off? Right? You're just going to go find the next deal, find the next deal. But I'll tell you what's much harder than doing the next deal or the next fix and flip or the next whatever. It's much harder designing this for your family and your heirs. That's a much greater gift than, hey, I left you a bunch of, properties in Philly where I'm from, right? Like, no, I'm just leaving them a bunch of headaches. No, how do I leave them? How am I more intentional? And what are our family values? Like we have family meetings, and we're like, even my two sons. There's big differences in opinion in these guys, but we do come to consensus of what do we like to invest in, what do we want the family's charities to be, what do we want to be involved with, what are the rules of the road for the members of the family, because at some point you're going to either sell all your assets or sell your business. So now you're an investment company. You're going to have to invest that capital that you hopefully were successful and walked away with, right? So you're always going to have this thing going on, right? Where, but my other freedoms were, I think I mentioned them, but money, location, responsibility, purpose is one, and relationships is one. So, like I was saying earlier, I only have a limited amount of time. I want to enjoy who I'm working with and what I'm doing. I don't want to be like, why am I in the wrong meeting? Or why am I on the wrong team? Or why am I working with people I'm not enjoying this? Why am I not working in my unique ability? Why am I not, you know, I'm not adding a lot of value. Someone came to me and said, Dave, we want you to help you with this tech project or something. I'm like, why are you coming? Like, no, I'm not a COO. Right? I was a CEO. Right? So it's really just it's self-awareness. Like I said, everybody's good at something. It's just really knowing yourself, knowing what you're good at. Now, you may have different 6 freedoms or 7 freedoms. Maybe you have one that's health. Maybe you want freedom from addiction. you know, addicted to gambling, addicted to whatever, drugs, sex, you go on and on. Right? You could have a variety of freedoms. I'm just encouraging you to think about it and maybe make your own set of rules of hey, I mean, you can more than borrow mine. I'm just saying I didn't invent this theory either. I'm sure there's other people that are doing things similar to this of just having some rules of the road for themselves, of okay, a project comes by me, home comes to me with some crazy deal, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, I'm not in the area, it's not in my location where I'm at, or he wants me to have some kind of responsibility. I'm like, it's complex. Now my wife, I get hit by a bus. My wife's partners with Hone. Do I want to do that to her? She'll probably be like cussing at my tombstone. Like I don't know that I want that. But I'm getting the point. But I think a lot of us don't think about stuff like that. I see people jump into partnerships and different things that they're not questioning enough of hey, what are you really doing? What's your goal and what's your exit? Like a lot of people don't have any succession planning or exit planning. Like if you're think about it this way, what do they tell you when you invest? You should know your exit. How many real estate people know their exit when they get into a real estate deal or a real estate partnership? Do they really know their exit? Early on I did a house, I was rehabbing a house that burnt down, and me and a buddy bought it. And he wanted to sell it, and the market was terrible to sell it, and I wanted to rent it out. And when we found it out? When we were done the project. Well, that's not the time to find that out. Luckily, we're still friends, and I bought the guy out. But that could have went the other way pretty easily, right? So I do encourage people to think about that. They don't necessarily think about that. I've seen people come to me with some syndications and they don't have a lot of depth on the team or something, and I'm like, well, what happens if something happens to you? And next thing you know, I'm partners with your wife in this apartment complex. Like, she doesn't know anything about apartments, or maybe she does, but you get what I mean. Like, it's like, what am I signing up for? So I'm very cautious, probably in my in my years now, but it doesn't mean you can't invest, and it doesn't mean you can't do well, and it just makes it more intentional, and you got to think more. It's actually when you're dealing with your family and your heirs and what you need to set up, it's much harder to invest passively than to go actively find a flip and go do it. That's easy. I could go, we renovated literally thousands of properties, right? So I could, yeah, it's not hard for me to go find a deal in about an hour and go renovate it. Like, yeah, okay.
At what point in your life did this is flip the switch for you? Like,
I was older. I was older. In fact, I'm toying with, do I do a little book about some of this? Because I'm putting some stuff together,
and I think you should. And I think you should, just because this is a powerful thing.
I was probably in my 50s or 60 before I started to realize, it's not always what it's cracked up to be. Okay, we have, because I know what my goals were in the early days. My goals in the early days was, at one point I was like, I want to buy one house a year. Then I was like, I want 20 houses free and clear. Then I go, oh, I want 100 houses. Then I go, oh, I want 100 notes. Then I'm like, I want 100 apartment complexes. Right? Like, it starts to become, what? Okay, why are you doing all this stuff? Where are you going with all this?
I feel like you're talking about me right now.
And then it's like, well, what's your time worth, and what do you what's really meaningful?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because like, I was kind of catching up on your path, and I knew you were a painter at one point. You did a lot of things, and I'm just like, wow, it sounds just like me. But now as I'm talking to you, you're like, you talked about freedom, responsibility, and yet I'm feeling like, okay, I tried to retire last 2 years ago, and I got really, really bored. And then I quickly realized, like, I'm missing that purpose. I'm like, and enjoyed like building stuff. And so I found myself like, just like, wow, what else can I do now? Now that I got all this time and freedom, what else can I do? But yet you touched on something that really hit me right now: the freedom, responsibility, and overcommitment. I'm feeling that right now. So everything you're talking about really resonates. So, what I'm trying to say is like, you got to write this book. I'd be the first one in line to, like, I'm so glad we're having this.
Here's more responsibility for you. You got to write a book now.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I think you're kind of right. It's just like, where are you going with it all? What are you signing up for? And what does it all mean? And you don't want to, no one wants to waste their life, right? Or here's what I figured out in the end. I had the same feeling at first when I started to go, because my succession planning took several years, right? I had to, I did a lot with our marketing team. I did a lot with investor relations, raising capital, and I did a lot with just being the CEO, right? And it was sometimes overwhelming. It was a lot, right? And the company was really growing and things like that. But when I went to start to replace myself, and started to do succession planning, even not just for me, for our C-suite and some of my partners, because we were, some of us were in our 60s, and you start to go, all right, you're not being prudent at some point. You got $1 billion company here. Are you being prudent, not doing succession planning, right? And it's really critical to do that. And then we brought in some experts and some M&A people, and then hired a search firm, and eventually I started taking off some of the hats. I brought in help on the marketing side, brought in help, brought a guy in, set up a whole investor relations team. There was like 10 people here. It's a much bigger department today, and then eventually got a great CEO, and did that transition and made all that happen. But and then formed a board and things like that. So there was definitely work to do. But you're right. Like, so then when you're semi-retired or you're retired, you're like, okay, what's my purpose? Am I bored now? But what I quickly found was my passive investments grew so much, all my alternatives and my passive stuff in my portfolio. There was a lot of things I didn't. It's funny, like, how the shoemaker's kids need shoes kind of thing. It's like, I'm working on the business. So, you're working 80, 90 hours a week, it feels like, and you're doing this and doing that. And you're like, but you're neglecting things at home in some ways, right? You're not working on your own portfolio and things. But if you're somewhat successful and you start to go passive over the years, like I did, you're going to have a passive portfolio that becomes a full-time job almost, because you're going to have enough passive investments. You're going to have to monitor, even though I say the ideal is to be more passive, it is just that. It's an ideal. It's never completely passive, right? Because even the passive stuff, you have to do due diligence, or you have to get reporting, or you have to oversee things, or you have to think about your investment strategy, your allocation thesis, and you're like, okay, how do I want to diversify this portfolio? What are our core values? What do we want to invest in? I have one son that doesn't like to invest in things that are detrimental to people or the environment, right? Or I have another son that likes other things, right? Like, so you want to kind of marry them, and what you'll realize is that soon becomes your purpose along with anything else. So I've been doing some more areas where I'm helping, other folks. So most of what I do today is helping other people. It's not even like, money's not even on the list, really. I mean, yeah, I have, I'm fortunate. I don't have to worry about money. I'll probably never spend all the money I have. So for me, it's like, I literally wake up every day and when I'm praying, I'm like, I want to help others today. Help me to help others. Help me to not be selfish, self-centered, and all that. Help me to help others. Now,
That's incredible.
I'm not perfect in this area, but when I start my day like that, my negative thoughts don't get the chance to creep in. Like, I kind of like, it's like gratitude, right? I wake up, what I'm grateful for. Hey, help me do this today. Help me to help others. Help me to stay out of myself. Help me to be, a good person. And then I go out about the day that way. And but it is a different mindset and a different goal, because now it doesn't mean I don't need money, but it's really, I need money. You know why I need money? So I can help more people.
That's incredible.
I need money. I don't need money. Like, you can't. Here's why. Life's a big casino. The chips are on the table, right? Me, you, and Hone got the chips on the table, and we can play the game. I can give you some of my chips, I can borrow some chips. I can put the chips to charity. Like, I can't take them chips with me though when I leave. I got to leave all the chips on the table. And I think a lot of us don't go through life like with that. We're like, oh, like I have control or I have all these chips. We don't have control. Yeah, we think we do.
That takes a lot of
Uh,
pressure off of things.
Yeah, it does. You don't have control. So.
Yeah, that's a lot of chips on the table to be playing around, and it's nice to have that. I could use some of those chips right now to do some damage with especially with the housing crisis here and helping people too, like assisted living and sober living. I feel like we're sharing the same passion here. I do want to touch on a couple things, and this is just more selfishly
I was
asking.
gonna say selfish. This is for us. This
Yeah,
isn't for the listeners. This is
this
for
is
us.
this is for us. But look, Hona and I have young kids, and you talked about you have two sons, and you're talking about succession plans, right? But I have a 10-year-old and 14-year-old. They're at that age now where they're starting to pay attention, right? And I know that your sons have seen the success and have watched you, right? And do you have any parenting tips on like how to sort of speak pass the torch? That's even the right phrase. Just want to understand, like, just because, my kids are exposed to things that maybe not a lot of their friends are. And I just want to get an idea of like how I should be uh, parenting them at this point.
I guess there's also a concern, right? It's like, yeah, we may have been very financially successful, and with great power comes great responsibility. How do you raise kids that aren't spoiled? How do you create responsible children with this power?
And teach them how to be shepherds of wealth, let's just say.
Yeah, it's not easy, right? So, and some of it depends on what stage you were at when you, like, for example, my oldest son's 40, and I have four grandkids from 5 to 18. So I get the kids part. I'm actually taking my one grandson to a football game this weekend, a preseason NFL game, right? So I'm well aware of that, but it's much more challenging today because they have so much technology and so much information. And then we did a lot of crazy things in this country, like we sent everyone to college, and, and we've done some dumb things. And but your kids are smart. They know if their parents have money, right? It's not like you can hide it, right? So, but I think a lot of it comes back to how the family operates and the rules of the road for the family. Probably one of the easier ways is if you have any kind of family bank system where the family could be the source of any loans and things like that. And we do incorporate some of that stuff where we have, insurance on family members, and you could create more of a family bank, more like like a family office would do. And I think that's really where you want to head to, because if you think about it, family offices have things figured out. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they have things figured out better than probably the average family. Because if you think about it, your family's really a business. They just don't talk about it, and they're not taught that. But if you really think about it, doesn't every family have income? Doesn't every family have liabilities? Don't they have a P&L and a balance sheet? And they do. And that's why we're such train wrecks, because we don't train people to run their family first like a business. But then you also have these other components of, morality and what the family will, likes and doesn't like and why. There's not enough communication, I think, and not enough shared values because they're not discussed.
Mm. So
So,
at what point in when you were raising your kids, did you start talking about wealth and financing and all that?
well, the earlier the better. And then the other thing that's a little tricky is not every kid goes to college, right?
I didn't.
You might have college funds. Well, what happens if one of the kids don't go to college, right? You had a college
Hmm.
fund for someone that's not using it, right? But my oldest son does my first business. He has a painting company today, and it's very successful, very successful. And then my other son works at PPR, but they both had gone and worked elsewhere first before they came back and did, similar things, right? My one son's been at PPR 12 or 13 years, 12 years. Um, so, but it is good for your kids to go work elsewhere. That I definitely recommend. But a lot of it is how you handle money in the household. Now, like my youngest son was very good with money. My oldest son, less so, but he was very, my oldest son could fix anything kind of guy, very handy, right? Very athletic. My other son was the opposite. My other son was, he was like a writer, and they were, one was an outgoing, one was an introvert. They were just opposites. So that happens, and it's really, I like to let my kids, I meet them where they're at. I'm not going to try to make them be something they're not. I mean, I think that's ludicrous. I do see that happen where parents try to force the kid to be something that they're not, or something, which is, I don't know how much sense that makes. But I think a lot of it comes back to what they're taught. Now, my youngest son, a couple things I did with him, I used to trade options when he was in high school, and he would trade options alongside me. The other thing I had him do was he started to, if for his allowance, I had him work on my tax returns. So he would add up all my receipts back then. Now today I don't do that. I don't have a lot of receipts and things like that. But I had multiple businesses, I had multiple receipts and bills, and I had him do that to get his like money for the week kind of thing.
And how old was he at this time?
He was in high school. He
Like
was like
16,
yeah, you can do
15.
it from eighth, ninth grade up. Like, so
Oh,
he's like, why am I adding up all these receipts? I go, well, they're write-offs for us. This is what we say, and this is how we. And he goes, well, this seems like a lot of work. I go, yeah, but let me show you how much we saved in taxes by doing this. Oh, okay. And that's how I'm able to pay you an allowance. And then it clicks, right? Well, today he's my trustee on a lot of stuff. He's 34. But he's very, between working at PPR, seeing the legalities of a lot of things. He's involved. He sees he sees all the investment portfolios of the family. He sees everything we do and invest in. But he's been groomed since he was, a teenager, right? So he's now the other thing is take him to all your adult stuff, meetings with attorneys, closings. Take your kids to as many closings as you can. Get them involved in the investments early on. Give them a piece of the action early on. It's funny. This 8-year-old that I'm taking to the ball game knows more about money than Cone does. No, I mean, like he's cheap pop. Show me how to make money. So it's like no, some of them. No, not every kid's like that. My granddaughter's more into horseback riding. Right, she's not thinking about that today, but a lot of it is. Having some rules of the road for the family and expectations. And this is, hey, if you're doing the wrong thing, you're not going to be able to participate, right? If you're on drugs, you're not going to get a loan from the family bank. If you have something that's going on and you want to borrow money from the family, then we'll have insurance on you. And if you don't pay it back, you'll never borrow again. And if you do, you'll get another loan. So it's really, that type of thing, as long as it fits in some of the guidelines of sanity.
Right. So you're leveraging one of those revocable living trusts, and then you have that bank account, and then the trustee says, okay, if you bring a business plan or something like that, then we'll loan you the money for specific things. And then we take out that life insurance policy against you so that if you don't pay it back and then you pass away, then the policy pays the family bank back so that the bank is never negative or never short of the funds.
I mean, that's one good way to do it, right? So, but if you're successful and you have money to invest, it becomes less about yield too, as you become more and more successful. So when you're young and dumb, it's all about IRR and all that. But as you get older, it's more about preservation and consistency, and more about risk. You're definitely looking at risk, and you're looking for that efficient frontier of risk, right? You're looking at how much risk am I really taking on? And I see, especially real estate investors, myself included, for many years, did not view risk correctly.
So how did they view it incorrectly? How are they viewing
They take on way too much risk. I mean,
and what does that look like? Like
well,
specifically?
they're just lopsided. They're disproportionate, because I was guilty of it. All my holdings were real estate, which is not necessarily prudent. just like business owners, they plow all their money back into the same business, right?
Okay, so lack of diversification is one way that they're being overly risky. Is there anything else tangible that we can like really?
Well, there's a trade-off there. So the trade-off is control, and you know it. So it's hard to be prescriptive there, right? It's hard to say don't do the family business because you know you'll make X and you control it, versus go invest with this crazy person that you don't know and hope for the best, right? That's a stretch, right? So, but you got to find some kind of balance in there somehow that ways to mitigate some of that. It's one of the things my company does, right? If you think about my company, it's designed for passive investors to give them a vehicle, right? We're approaching, what's it now? Our 17th year we're heading into of giving investors consistent, solid returns with diversified portfolio that they don't have to do anything,
We
right? So,
actually didn't go into your company too much. So it's $1 billion plus company, which is amazing. So congratulations on that. But that's the headliner. We get a billionaire founder on Quest for Keys with Hone and Alvin, right? So $1 billion company, which like it's a very small club that you're a part of. But so what does this company do? What is PPR? What does it do? What are these investments? Break
yeah,
that
I
down.
mean, the majority of it is, I'd say right now it's about 70% of the portfolio is still mortgages. We buy a lot of non-performing mortgages, but it's growing rapidly on the commercial real estate side. And, I could see in a couple of years where that's going to be a little different, where, it'll be 50% mortgages or even less. And it'll be more commercial real estate. And, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what it is. So, but it's very well diversified. We have a very good team. We have great analysts, great due diligence teams, great surveillance teams. We have an economist on staff. We get a lot of, uh, we have an investment committee. So there's a lot that goes into doing it. I want to say right, but it's hard to do that alone. It's hard to do all the pieces alone. So yeah, we're fortunate, and then we have good partners too. We have access to a trade desk in New York. We have a lot of good partners. We've got a lot of good institutional partners, good institutional capital behind us. So yeah, I mean it's exciting right now. So we've had pretty much hockey stick type growth. Um,
And so you raise from private investors as well as have institutional funds, and then you take these funds and then you go and buy tapes of non-performing notes, mostly residential, and then soon more commercial non-performing notes as well. The
yeah,
commercial.
yeah, we buy. It's mostly on the resi side, but yes. And what we do is the private equity that we raise, we marry that with institutional money, and then we get a blended rate. And then um, but we've been doing this a while. This isn't like we woke up and said let's start this today. We started back in 2007. Man.
Hey, Alvin, you want to start a note fund? And we're gonna buy a whole
Yeah,
bunch
I
of
got
notes.
I gotta finish reading Dave's book first.
It's more difficult, and it's very regulated today, especially on the residential side. So there's a lot of regulations. It's probably easier to start, a hard money fund or something like that, where it's considered commercial. Not trying to discourage it. It's just you need scale and a lot of capital, and
Mm.
its regulatory environment's tough, right? So to be successful in that area, it takes a little bit of scale and a lot of experience and efficiency.
You always hear about Warren Buffett saying when you start a business, make sure you have a moat. So what Dave is doing, and he's a master at it, is he's creating a moat of fear. So he puts out there that it's hard to do. There's a lot of regulations. You need scale. Don't do it, guys. So then he keeps away all of his competitors, right? Fantastic job, Dave.
No, the government actually got rid of most of our competitors, so I didn't have to do that. But we were kind of fortunate because we were small in the very beginning, and then we started pre Dodd Frank, and then when the regulatory environment came in after 2008, things got tougher and tougher and tougher, especially by 2010 and 2012, started to get harder and harder. So I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying it's got to know what you're doing, and because the regulatory slap on the wrist can be a lot more than what you spend on your note. So you just got to be aware of that.
Gotcha. One thing I wanted you to touch upon, because I think it's the neatest thing, and it's rare that we have somebody who is in the third quarter, maybe fourth quarter, as you mentioned, right? But you were talking about your mom to me personally, right, on the phone. You were telling me how your mom's in her 90s and she has rental properties, and you're
Well, she
like,
did. Yeah.
she did, okay. And you're like, see, you real estate investor guys, you do it all wrong. You don't think about the end, and what if you're 90 and you have all these rental properties? Then what? And you're in your no go years. Like, so could you elaborate on that, expand on that? Where what is it that us younger real estate investor guys are doing wrong, and what should we plan for? What kind of exit should we think about? And I know you were talking about that in terms of like you're either going to be like a family office or a family investment company, right? So like how should we plan it? What is it that we're doing wrong, and how can we do it right?
Well, it's just knowing what you're trying to build, right? And my mom, for example, had rental properties, and I'm trying to think. She started around age 60, picking up rental properties, and but what happens? You hear people say things like, I call them real estate myths, like defer, 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 die. For example, oh, we're just going to own property forever, and we're going to defer the taxes, and then we're going to die, and you're going to get a stepped up basis. But there's a couple things you're not talking about. That works great if you die young. The longer you live, the harder it is to do that because, like, say I still have my 40 places. Are my heirs going to help me with CapEx? Are they going to go over and cut the grass and do the clean out and help pay for it? And no, they don't want anything to do with that. They want you to leave that to them. So even my oldest son, who's 40, he has rental properties. He's in a different county than where my properties were. So what's he going to go down and take care of them? Blah, blah, blah. Right? No, it would be a pain in the neck. So, and the other side is, so people don't think about that kind of thing. Even my mom, she's 92 now. Well, who was taking care of the properties when she was 72, when she was 82? She wasn't able to take care of them, right? So it was me. That's how I know this, right? So it's like, but people go, well, it's all about the taxes, the tax tails wagging the dog kind of thing. And it's like, no, it's insane for me to be taking care of mom. Well, look at my son, for example. If when I'm 85, my son will be, in his 60s. Is he going to need my properties? No, he's got a super successful business. He's got his own rental portfolio already. Like, does he want? It's just a headache to him. It's not a good thing necessarily. Now, some people might be like, well, the family members grew up in the business. Not everybody grows up and says, I want to be a real estate investor. Like I have one family member that thinks what we do is, I don't know, he thinks being a landlord is unethical, or being in the, delinquent mortgage space is not the best business to be in. It's not a business they like. They don't want to be in collections. Right? So not every personality and every person's cut out to do whatever it is we're thinking we're building. Doesn't necessarily mean all our heirs are like, yeah, I want to grow and be just like Hone. They actually think the opposite. They think we're crazy, that we're workaholics, that there's something wrong with us, that all we think about is real estate. You know what I mean? Like, um, so I'm mixed on some of that. There's more than one way to make a successful life, or to make even successful financially. It doesn't always have to be just real estate. I mean, there's going to be a lot of boomers in businesses right now. You could go in and scoop up a lot of service businesses that would crush your returns of any real estate deal. So there's other ways to make money, right? So.
All right. Yeah, that okay. I have heard of the buy, borrow, die, defer, defer, defer. Like, yes. But I've never heard somebody say, yeah, that works if you die young. That's like, wow, boom, right? There's a key right there. Holy smokes, right? It's like, yeah, it's never been put that way. So that's really cool. I'm glad you.
Well, I mean, think about it. Right? Like my mom's property, we sold probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe. And if she still had them, guess who would be taking care of them? Me. And trust me, They would be a thorn in my ass if I
More
was
responsibility.
taking care of my mom's properties. The other thing is, even when I sold my last 14, what do you think I did? I just repositioned all the equity. I owned properties over 30 years. I had properties I owned like 33 years. And here's the other thing no one talks about. I had properties I put 3 kitchens in 10 years. No one talks about, oh, I'm going to renovate them again, right?
They
Like,
only talk about the first renovation
oh, the burr method. Oh, yeah, you might be burring every 5, 10 years. Well, even when you buy an apartment complex, give it 10 years, you're going to renovate the whole place, right? So I just don't think we fully grasp all that stuff. We're really thinking about what are we walking into when it comes to responsibility and obligation and commitment, and that these can be ongoing commitments. Now, I'm not saying don't do them, if that's what you want to do, but you're also being super active. And as you go through middle age, start to get older, how much stuff do you keep piling on? I have many friends that are actually going more active and more active and more active. And I'm like, okay, I guess. Why?
because they don't know how to stop. That's probably the hardest thing for an entrepreneur is know when to say no.
Yeah, but you could still do other things. It's just, Alvin hit on it a little bit. Like you have to find a new or better purpose. And I'm not saying that's always easy, but I think a lot of people it's not even on their radar. They're not even thinking about that. It's just like retirement. They only look at retirement from a financial aspect. They don't look at it from a holistic view. What's really going to give my life meaning in retirement? How do I really want to spend my time? And what's really going to give me joy? You know, no, I'm lucky. I can do a lot of things. I can help a lot of people.
Right. So you have like age appropriate activities. Triple A.
Not even that. I mean, I try to stay as active and as young as I can. I mean, I'm not, I'm not trying to act like the nails are into golfing or something. But I also know we're not sea turtles, right? We're not going to live to be 350. I'm just being practical, right? Like, me and my wife just had gotten a house in Florida. It's all one floor. I'm not a fool, right? Like I'm not looking for steps, you know, I'm not, and we look at certain things that fit us it's gated. I'm not saying you have to move into over 55. In fact, my wife didn't want to. She likes kids and things like that. So everybody's different, and I'm not saying people got to do what I do. I think that's silly. Do what fits you. But I think, you just want to be intentional, right? Think about it and what makes the most sense for you. But I think a lot of people don't plan things like that. Does your house suit you all through your life? Probably not.
I don't think people ever think about that until like way late. I don't think anybody thinks of any of this conversation until way late.
Well, then they're forced to, and then it becomes traumatic. It's just it's not planning to fail; it's failing to plan, kind of stuff.
Right. And then they play defense the whole time.
And they're playing defense or they're taking a hit because they didn't think it through.
Right. And then they're scrambling to try to
And
figure out.
you don't always have to own things. Like I'm a big control guy. I'm more about controlling things than necessarily owning everything. And you can do a lot of your estate planning that way. You can do a lot of, and no one says you have to own all your properties.
What's that tangibly look like when you say you control
Here's an
things?
example. Like it's possible to rent something fully furnished in a great location for a second home than actually owning the second home. No one says you have to own the second home, right? So it's like
that's a practical solution that nobody says. It's blasphemy. It's almost blasphemy to say that you rent a place. It's so crazy.
I mean, think about it. Look how much real estate I technically, 3/4 of my net worth is probably my company, and we own a lot of real estate. A lot. We own all our assets, right? We bought over 13,000 assets, right? So we own a lot of assets. Now, say I go to Florida, I could go rent a place in a zero income tax state for 7 months, fully furnished, for the price of owning a place for a year, and not have any bills. All the grass is cut, the bills are paid, it's fully furnished. I don't have to buy a fork, right? I could just go stay there, and then if I get tired of that place, I can go somewhere else, right? Like it's called freedom. It's freedom's more valuable than the stupid real estate. And no, you can have all what you're making off your holdings are one thing. Where you're choosing your lifestyle is completely different. And especially high end rentals, you can rent a $5 million house for like the cost of owning a $2 million house. So it gets to a point where, honest to God, it's stupid.
Yeah, my wife and I actually had this discussion just over the weekend. We're talking about like, when we were first starting out, we're like talking about dream homes here and there. And then now we're like, what's the point on even buying a dream home at this point when we can just move around, rent it out? It's like that's exactly what we're talking about. Like now we're gonna have enough passive income to afford the lifestyle that we want without having the responsibility that you were talking about earlier. That freedom of responsibility, I love it. That's man, you just hit everything on the
Well,
there.
just like short term rentals, like a lot of times people go, well, you could buy a second home and short term rental when you're not there. Well, yeah, but now I'm in the hotel business. If I need the money, that makes sense. Or I didn't save enough for retirement. Yeah, house hack, do whatever you got to do. I'm not knocking any particular strategy. So I don't want people to think that. But if you are okay and you have plenty of money, then you have to ask yourself, why do I want to be in the hotel business? Like,
Hmm.
what am I signing up for? Like, no, I want to just go kayak with my wife. No, I just want to play chess with my grandson. I don't want to be changing sheets.
This is so cool. This is like killing the sacred cows. I recently heard this one thing where this woman was depressed. She went to a therapist, and the therapist, after many hours, ultimately boiled it down and said, okay, what's really wrong? And the woman said, I spend so much time washing the dishes. I have to clean them first and then put them in the dishwasher, or else they don't get clean enough. And the therapist said, why don't you just put the dirty dishes in the dishwasher and run it twice? And the woman's jaw just dropped because never in a million years did she think she's allowed to run it twice, right? She can only run it once. So that means she must clean it first. So you're saying like, hey, just rent. Who cares? It's so yeah, we box ourselves in with these arbitrary rules that we kind of hear and we follow them without knowing why. And so what I really gained from this conversation, one of the big keys is just constantly ask why. Why are you doing this? Why are you chasing that? Why do you want this? Like, do you actually want it, or is it somebody else telling you that you should want it? And so when you ask yourself why enough times, you create the lifestyle that actually suits you. It's like, yeah, you can own an Airbnb or whatever, but why? Do you want to be in the hospitality business? Do you need the income? Or do you think it's like the most prudent and smart thing to do when really it's not? Or it may not be
Well,
based on
I
your
mean,
freedom of
right. I
responsibility
mean,
and
you could say
vision.
that vacation homes are a great place to look at that. And I'm a guy that I built a vacation home in a gated community and owned it for 12 years. I've since sold that, and I'm not so sure I would own another vacation home or a second residence because I like that freedom of flexibility. And here's the other thing. So say I buy a house in Florida, Arizona, Texas, wherever I'm a snowbird. And okay, it's 10 years from now or 15, and then something happens to me. Well, guess who has to deal with that property out of state? Like now my wife or heirs have to go, okay, we got to go disposition this place, blah, blah, blah. Now you might go, yeah, but the house went up in value, blah, blah, blah. Well, so did my investments, right? Right? Like that's not the only thing that goes up in value. It's like you also
Right.
brought in a lot of complexity, work, and aggravation. So can I have investments that go up in value that throw off cash flow that don't bring in a lot of aggravation to the family? Right. That's just another way to look at it. Now I'm not saying families shouldn't have a family business though that the heirs could run. There is something to say about having some controls and a core business for the family or something. There's nothing wrong with these things, but just being cautious about how much responsibility and time are you signing up for? Because if you do it right, you can have enough passive income and enough passive investments where you won't have to work.
Right. All right. Well, Dave, we are at the top of the hour. We typically like to end it with the triad of success, right? So that's where we believe that their true success is built on three essential pillars: health, wealth, and relationships, right? And it's funny because your six freedoms actually ties into this. We believe that mastering the area in these areas is the key to living a fulfilled life. So if you were to wrap it all up, what are the key insights that you've gained where health, wealth, and relationships all come together? So if you could sum it all up based on your third quarter, fourth quarter of life, health, wealth, relationships, what would be a takeaway that you've gained over the years that you've been investing and living?
I hate to keep coming back to this thing called leverage because people's minds go to money at first. But there's a lot of things you can leverage that'll improve things. So I'll give you an example. His was a little over a year. I stopped. I stopped alcohol, and it changed my health dramatically. Now I'm just using that as an example. I'm not saying people have to do that, but my point is, there's always something in any aspect of your life that'll give you leverage and it'll catapult you in an area of, like reward or whatever. It's like, well, I quit smoking. Well, that's dramatically improves your health, right? Or I did, um, a new habit that just dramatically changes things. So I think for me, I definitely did not, you know, even though I am considered halfway successful by a lot of people, I actually look at I could have done a lot more than I did. I could have done a lot better than I did. I should have utilized leverage in different aspects of my life that I didn't. And it could be, we don't, it's like Tony Robbins says, we don't lack resources, we lack resourcefulness, right? So it's back to, could I have incorporated tech more? Could I have hired more people sooner? Could I have done, just things like that? Sort of like what I was saying to you guys about what I discovered in my 50s and early 60s. I didn't, I could have been doing things differently when I was 30 and 25, that I look back on and say, why didn't I? There were, I honestly believe a lot of the, I wouldn't say errors in judgment were before I was 35, where I just did, and it wasn't my fault or anything. It was just, I just didn't know any better. Right. And I think there's a lot of things that we could do differently, especially starting out, where we really aren't taught the real order of the universe of how to do things to really get ahead, and that'll catapult us, kind of thing, and it could be a lot of different things, but it's leverage. What are you leveraging in different areas of your life that's going to make the most difference?
Well, the problem is you, Dave Van Horn, didn't have Dave Van Horn to look up to. So we don't have to make the same mistakes. But David, thank you so much for being on today's pod, and thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and allowing us who were still active to see our business and our life in a completely different way. This was incredible, and the reason we had you on here was because our last guest, Matt Faircloth, said you taught him a lot, and I said, who better than to have the man himself on the pod? So, Dave, thank you.
I appreciate
Thank you, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me.
If anybody wanted to reach out to you or learn more about you, what would be the best way?
Probably the easiest is on LinkedIn, or you could go to our website, which is PPR Capital MGMT.com. And you can find us there if any interest in what we do.
All right. Awesome. Well, that was a fantastic episode. I'm Hone. That's Alvin. That's Dave. Thanks, guys. See you in the next episode.
See you guys.